do you know when a salesperson is lying?
When they're talking.
What's that?
When they're talking.
Yeah, when their lips move. And what's the difference between a used car salesman and a software salesman?
No difference.
Degree.
A used car salesman knows when he's lying. Okay, now have you heard that recently they're using salespeople in medical experiments instead of rats? Why do you think that is? Well, there's three reasons. One is there's a lot of them. And let's see. Oh, no one cares much what happens to them. And third is there are some things that rats just won't do. Anyway, salespeople have, and I'm going to explain exactly why in a moment. Salespeople generally are not highly ranked in the esteem rankings, and that is too bad. That is a serious problem, and I'm trying to save you from that misconception. Because if you want to have a successful startup, you have to have a positive attitude and quite a lot of knowledge about selling and salespeople. And I'll try to explain that in the next few minutes. So let me make point number one, which we've already touched on. So there are the nerds and the suits. So I started life as a nerd, and I ended up as a suit, although I am pretty nerdy for a suit. And these two stereotypes are very destructive. So a nerd is someone who knows how to make electrons dance or knows how to use libraries and JavaScript. And it's the suits who call them nerds. Actually, nerds prefer to be called geeks. But it's the suits who call them nerds because that's a disparaging pejorative. And the reverse is suits, empty suits. The salespeople they don't know anything. They can't write code, for example. So that makes them lower than whale shit because they can't write code. And so this nerds and suits thing, that dichotomy is a broken one, and you really want to escape it. And as I'm fond of saying, these are different life forms. That is, salespeople and engineers are quite different, but they're both carbon-based. So there's hope of reconciliation. And one of the things to watch for is when you're building a company is that nerds don't know how to recruit suits because they don't know a good one when they see it, and vice versa. Suits have a hard time recruiting nerds because they don't know a good one. So you have to be very careful as you're building it to seek advice on how to recruit the opposite. Because that's, if you've ever seen a sales force recruited by an engineer, it's generally broken. Because they recruit people who are sort of like them, like engineers, that don't have those DNA modifications necessary to be a good salesperson. So here are my objectives today. We're going meta today, so I'm going to try to sell selling. See why that's going meta? But just then I went meta on meta. So I was talking about selling, so I was meta squared for a moment there. So before I'm done, I want to convince you that selling is important, it's hard work, it's a high art. I'm going to try to give a few pointers on how to sell, and then I'm going to encourage you to start selling now. And Josh and I have come up with a plan to give you some practice in selling. The plan isn't finished yet, but we're going to try to give you, maybe not tonight.
I can have it ready by the end.
You'll have it ready by the end?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for giving me some credit. It was your idea.
Well, I'm giving you credit for liking my idea.
I like it.
So, here's where I'm coming from. This is one of my favorite slides because it's about one of my favorite subjects. So I was raised on Long Island, which is I'm really sorry about that. People from Long Island are very difficult to deal with. If you thought salespeople were bad, you should try people from New York. And then I was a student, and I hardly did any selling during that 23 years. And then engineer and scientist, and highly technical, not very much selling. But then I started a company. And as you'll see in a moment, it was through that experience that I got thrust into being a salesperson and had to learn it and successfully did so, but only by the skin of my teeth. and only for 2 years. And then I became a publisher, and I sold about $100 million a year in advertising. And advertising is a special kind of thing to sell. Generally, you sell it on Madison Avenue in New York at fancy restaurants with spiffy suits and everything. If you really want to be a suit, sell advertising. And then I became a venture capitalist, which is a slightly different kind of selling, but then all of our portfolio companies had to sell their products, so I got to enjoy that. And now I'm enjoying the selling that I see here in Texas. And these are the startups I've been involved in. The ones crossed out didn't work out. 3Com was the big one. That was the billion-dollar company in which at one time I was vice president of sales and marketing. At InfoWorld, as I've already mentioned, I sold a lot of ads. And sometime I'm dying to brag about 1366 and Psionics, which are my two high-tech startups, very high-tech startups. But anyway, all of that was to say I've had a lot of experience watching sales and marketing and doing sales and marketing in the high-tech startup space, and I'm going to share you some of the learnings from that experience. So just to reiterate, my goals in being here in Austin are freedom and prosperity. And my strategy for pursuing those goals is to help teach you all how to operate the machinery of free enterprise, that is, start companies. And you'll know that the University of Texas has as its motto, what starts here changes the world. We're in the changes the world business here. And there's a list of skills that Josh and I and Ben talk about how to include them in the course. Writing, of course, you're now doing every week because we think writing, at least I think. Josh, do you think writing's important?
And email. Writing emails is important.
That's because he's an email guy. In any case, on my list of important skills as highlighted here is selling, which is what we're talking about tonight. I've been asked recently and just finished writing a paper, can entrepreneurship be taught? That's a recurring question. The answer is obviously yes, it can be. And the way I break it down is entrepreneurship is business plus ambition plus creativity plus, that's my favorite topic, selling. So the way you teach ambition is with role models who can be successful, who demonstrate for people that if you are starting companies, you can succeed. That's one of the advantages of living in Silicon Valley. You're surrounded by companies that have succeeded. So you begin to think, hey, maybe I could do that. And that sort of feeds ambition. Creativity is a harder case, but it's definitely something you can do on purpose. And then there's selling. And I break that out separately because I've seen that selling has a very special role in determining success. And I first discovered that role in meeting 3 famous people. So Steve Jobs. Have I told you my Steve Jobs story 10 times yet?
I don't think they've heard it yet.
Yeah, see, I have a big bitmap in my head. It has, vertically has the name of all 7 billion people on Earth. And then horizontally it has every story that I know. And I put a 1, so I'm going to put about 100 ones tonight. But I sometimes forget where the 1s and 0s are. Anyway, Steve Jobs is one of the most persuasive people I've ever met. He had what's famously called a reality distortion field. When I first met him in '79, and he wanted me to, as a networking wizard, he wanted me to join Apple, which was not a serious company quite yet. And I managed to escape his reality distortion field, which is a persuasion thing. And what I learned from that is that what Steve Jobs did for me after I rejected his offer was to help me build my company by introducing me to his network. And what I discovered, his network had a lot to do with selling. The first person he introduced me to was a man named Regis McKenna, who ran an ad agency in Palo Alto. You know the old Apple logo with it was rainbow colored with the bite? Regis came up with that on Lytton Avenue in Palo Alto. And Steve dragged me over. So here's Steve taking this nerd engineer, and the first thing he wanted to teach or share or mentor me, I'm 10 years older than Steve, but he was mentoring me. And he introduced me to Regis McKenna. Bill Gates, I also met, and he didn't share his network with me. He took my network from me. That is, he recruited.
Your Ethernet network?
I hasten to clarify, I'm referring to a people network, not a computer network. Wow, I'm sorry. I should have clarified that. So Bill Gates hired my friend Charles Simonyi. I recommended Charles talk to Gates. Gates is an enormously skilled seller. He sold Charles on leaving Xerox and joining Microsoft to write Microsoft Word. And Charles now has been to the International Space Station twice, has his own helicopter and his own jet plane, and lives on the lake in Seattle. And so Gates was a network guy, and he could sell, and he sold, he can sell, and he sold Charles at joining. And then it was Michael Dell, who I met many times, but in particular upon arriving here, I met him at a basketball game. My first question I asked him was, can entrepreneurship be taught? And the way I asked that question is I said, Michael, have you ever taken a class in entrepreneurship? Have you ever been in an incubator? Have you ever won a business plan competition? And what do you think his answer was? No. Which was devastating for this brand new professor of innovation. But then he hastened to add, but I wish I had, even Michael Dell. So entrepreneurship can be taught, and key in that teaching is the teaching of selling, which can also be taught. And while we're, I'll just skip that next. Remind me later if you're interested in the word entrepreneurship and why we should stop using it. So in 78, I met this man, Bernie Feshbach. I met him at a tennis court in Palo Alto. This is a drawing of Bernie. He's about to turn 90 now. And but he said this. I'm not sure he made this up. He claims to have made it up. I'm going to give credit because, as far as I'm concerned, he made it up. And so, sitting there on the tennis court, he said this: "Nothing happens until something gets sold." That is, that selling is pivotal to all human activity, and that procreation requires selling. Quite a lot of it. So remember Bernie Feshbach, as I do. He's still kicking, and he will be so delighted that I gave him credit tonight for this quote, which I'm sure he stole. And then in 1992, I wrote this article, it's called Joy and the Art of Selling, which you can Google up and read if you haven't yet. And incidentally, I received a bunch of feedback after I tweeted this week from Buddhists who were troubled by this connection. This is a literary illusion. It was a famous book called, what was it? Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. So the people at Technology Review made that illusion, but apparently there are Buddhists who are offended by this connection. Although, based on the sad events of this week in which a Buddhist was accused of violence in Washington, D.C., I'm going to go back to that now. And, in any case, here's what I meant when I said selling is akin to Zen, which is that there are levels of consciousness. And so the lowest level of consciousness is the build a better mousetrap consciousness. There are people who believe, as I once did, that if you build, the expression goes, if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. Well, I built a better mousetrap, and I sat there by the door, and guess what? Okay, guess what?
Nobody showed up.
No one came. It was a very lonely experience. So then, I took a Zen breath, if that's what you do, and went to the next higher level, which is I got out of the office and went out into the world and started arguing with people. And the best case of that was the IBM Corporation invited me to Franklin Lakes, New Jersey, and separately to Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, to argue with them about the networking of personal computers, which they didn't have yet. And I was peddling Ethernet as a method of connecting personal computers, of which there were hardly any. And IBM invited me to come down and brief them. And I went down prepared to argue with them, and I out-argued them. They paid me $2,000 a day, by the way, out of which I had to pay my expenses. But I had 2 shots at convincing the IBM Corporation to sell them on Ethernet. And I blew it. I blew it by going there in the second level of consciousness. I went to win the argument. So I showed up with all these rooms like this. People, God, are you the same people? Looked very much like this in a research, 2 sort of research environments. And I had a head start. I'd been working on local area networks for 7 years by the time I got there, and IBM's people, as good as they were, didn't have PCs yet, so they weren't working with LAN. They didn't know anything. So guess who won all the arguments? I did. Guess who failed to convince IBM to adopt Ethernet? I did. Because I was operating only at the second level of consciousness, which was the level of argue people. Because it turns out you can win the argument, but that doesn't make people give you the order. The goal is to get the order, not win the argument. So then I went up a level to the next level of selling consciousness, which I like to call suffering fools gladly. So you go out into the world prepared with all your arguments, but if you get into an argument, back off and smile and agree with the customer. The customer's an idiot. Doesn't know what they're talking about, but you want the order, and you realize that arguing with them is not going to get you the order, so you just suffer fools gladly. And it turns out that this method of selling is much better than the other 2, but it's still not very good. In fact, most salespeople, the salespeople that you disrespect, come from this kind of thinking. That is, if you're insincere every day, and you suffer fools gladly, it twists you over time. And pretty soon you start lying, and you start over-promising and under-delivering, which is the stereotype of the salesperson, the Willy Loman, death of a salesman kind of guy. But I warn you, this does work better than the preceding 2 levels of consciousness, but it is not the end. And the end I reached in 1982 or so, when I realized that my customers were good people. They knew a lot more about their problems than I did. And my goal was to not argue with them, not wait for them to come to my door, not suffer fools gladly, but the purpose was to listen to them and find out what problems they have and look for the maximal match. So listening is the highest Zen state of selling. Listening, and as I'm fond of saying, God gave us, or Darwin gave us, how many ears? 2. And how many mouths? 1. Take the hint. So, how important is selling? In the paper, Zen and the Art of Selling, you'll see these numbers. But in 1992, I recalled what 3Com's business model, my company's business model, was in 1989. And that was the level about 400 million. So we've been public for 5 years. So we had a sustainable business model. We were very profitable. And this is the model. So let me run through it quickly. No, in fact, why don't you just look at it and ask me questions? Any questions about this model? Any terminology you don't understand?
Were discounts for like new adopters or for people who've been very loyal?
Across the board. So when you sell into distribution, by then we had 2-step distribution. We were selling to distributors who sold to computer retailers in that time. So you have to give them discounts. There's the suggested retail price, then there's the street price, which is what they actually sell it at. Then there's what they pay for it, so there has to be room in there for them to feed their children. And they buy it from distribution, who also have children, so they have to have a few points of discount. When it all adds up, in our model, we gave on average about a 40-some% discount. from our suggested list price, so that our net revenue, sometimes called sales of a company, was 45% less than the gross revenue that we would have gotten had we sold all the products at list price, which we didn't. We had to give that discount to feed distribution. And distribution is mostly sales. Those people are out there selling your products. Now, this is a particular company at a particular time, and as I said, this is two-step distribution through distributors. And these are not software products, these are hardware products, which may also be different from your case. Other questions about this model? Yes?
It's your $10 net profit per shareholder. Is that a dividend?
No, it could be a dividend. You could dividend it out, but that's a decision.
It's like retained earnings.
If you don't dividend it out, it's retained earnings. If you do, it's dividend. So, for example, Microsoft just upped their dividend. They don't dividend all their profits, but they've just upped their dividend substantially. So you make a decision how much of your accumulated retained earnings you want to give to the shareholders and how much you want to reinvest in the company going forward. So that's 10% of sales, 10% of net revenue for the shareholders. That's after tax. Notice the tax is almost as big as the profit. That's about 40% income tax on corporate profit. The United States has the highest corporate taxes in the world. And there they are. And that was back in '89. They've gone up since then. Yes. Other questions about this model? Yes.
If that 10% on $10 is spent on engineering, including management, then how much is pure engineering the cost, including like R&D or such?
Welcome back. Good to see you again.
See ya.
So engineering includes engineering management, so maybe it's less than $10, but there's also engineering up in manufacturing. So you see overhead there in manufacturing. There are manufacturing engineers in overhead. They're very important, so you would add that back on. But just using round numbers, out of $181 of gross revenue, only about 10 of it is for engineering, roughly speaking, is for engineering, minus the management plus the engineers that are elsewhere. You might also find engineers in the field, in field sales. Where is that? Right here, that $18. Sometimes there's pre-sale support and post-sale support, which are engineers working in the field. So that might be an increment to the engineering number. The point of all this is how small engineering is compared to everything else. I mean, 10% of sales. Some companies go higher. Microsoft, on occasion, hits 25% of sales. Yes?
I think that's because your business model is really anecdotal. Because you pretty much give 45% to distribution. While there are a lot of tech companies that buy engineering, such as Apple and Tesla, which is kind of like a middleman, and sell by themselves.
Yeah.
Sell the product. So they completely cut the $81 million that they're giving out distribution. So in that case, engineering actually works more.
Well, maybe not, because one way to buy distribution is through discounts, which is, you're right, this anecdotal model. Another way to buy distribution is to do it yourself. So what would be interesting is to see what the selling expenses of Apple are, which would be below the line. So you notice this $18 of field sales and factory management is below the line. I bet you Apple spends much more on field sales. And, well, you know, Apple also goes through distribution. Well, they own their own stores. So that moves the expense comes out of revenue. Whereas if you do it in somebody else's store, then you're getting it through discount. So it's an expense either way. It's either an expense as a discount. But you're right. This is a particular company at a particular time. A web company has no. It's cost of goods sold, COGS. What is your COGS, Josh? Is it like 5%?
It's nominal. Yeah.
You must account for your servers somehow as cost of goods sold. That would be my guess.
You know, I don't know the GAAP interpretation. Usually on your own, you know, often in my experience, you have your own version of the books, and then you have your GAAP version of the books. And usually that's because of the particulars of your business, you feel like you want to look at things a certain way that might not be just like that. So normally for us, yes, we would try to find a way to back that into being part of COGS so that we could think of that as our cost of delivering service.
Actually, you end up with 3 sets of books:
Yeah.
GAAP, internal planning, and tax.
Yeah, budget and goal, right?
Yeah, you have tax books to avoid paying taxes. You have planning because you want to actually run your company, and then you have GAAP because somebody made that up.
Right, so in planning, you also usually have budget and goal, right? You have, here's what we think we're going to do, and here's what we're trying to do.
So when you're building, yes, go ahead.
At this point, did y'all already optimize like the cost of goods sold? Like we're already several years in running and like the best possible large scale production it could
This
be.
company's 10 years old at this point, and so we had, at this point we were doing assembly in Santa Clara, California. But you look at labor costs there. $1 out of 100 is direct labor. So so we were actually doing parts placement and PC board fabrication in Santa Clara, California with robots. So yes, we're pretty far down the chain. Yes.
How much does that breakdown vary between like year 1 versus year 3 versus year 10? Is like when you're first developing your product, is engineering going to be a higher proportion that's going to decrease over time as you get more established, or?
Absolutely. So like in the day 1 of this company, 100% of its expenses were engineering. But what we would do is, starting in when we were about a year old, we put down what our model should be, and then we tried each quarter to move all the numbers in direction of the model. So this is after 10 years. So this is steady state for that particular business. And then of course people started building Ethernet into the PCs, so that market went away. So $5 billion business went away in a few years because people started building Ethernet in. So then the model changed completely. That became a software company. Yes?
So at this stage, what was the mix of like OEM direct to like a PC manufacturer versus enhancement products and the later add-on to a PC? And how would that change the model?
This is mostly through two-step distribution. There were some OEM sales through HP or through TI, but those were not big compared to what we were getting through Computerland, Entree Computer Stores, Xerox, through the channels of distribution for PCs. And Compaq. And Compaq was, and Dell. All right, so what I'm trying to convince you of is it's a blunt point, which is companies are not all engineering. In fact, there are a lot of sales and marketing. A little later, I'm going to try to explain the difference between sales and marketing, hopefully before 9 o'clock. So, in selling, it's important to qualify your customers. You do that first. And generally, marketing, as I'll return in a moment, helps you do that. But you need to ask whether the people you're calling on are likely to need your product. And are they in a position, that individual you find, are they in a position to decide to buy your product? And do they have the budget? Are they expressing interest in your product? That's always a good sign. Are they ready to buy now, or are they just tire kicking for later? And are you selling to the users or to the buyers? Because very often the buyer is different from the user, and you can waste a lot of time selling to users. And then there's the notion that generally purchase decisions are not made by one person. They're made by a person and their boss and their supply chain manager and their staff. So when you're selling, you have to sell to the whole decision tree. You have to surround the decision makers in selling. So after you do all this selection, you end up with what are called qualified prospects, people worth investing your selling time in. You don't just sell to anybody around you, waste a lot of time. This is especially true of advertising. A lot of advertising, occasionally you'll see ads on television at football games. And you wonder, what the hell was that? And that was a bad advertising buy because the ad goes to everybody watching a football game as opposed to the 11 people who might be good prospects in that audience. That's a wasteful advertising buy because it doesn't properly qualify the viewer. Questions about qualification. First thing you do. For example, in my company's history, while you're thinking of a question, has anyone thought of a question yet? Yes.
Is this the same as prospecting?
Qualifying is part of prospecting. When you're out looking, prospecting like for gold.
Well, in the sales sense.
But then in the course of prospecting, you want to qualify your customers so you don't waste time. So in our case, most of the PCs in the world, when we came to market with our initial Ethernet products, were Apple IIs. And 10 megabit per second Ethernet was inappropriate for the Apple II, which was a pitiful 8-bit 6502 microprocessor. It just couldn't handle 10 megabit per second packet traffic. It was the tail wagging the dog. So, but they had the install base. There were hundreds of thousands of Apple IIs out there, the install base. Our competitors foolishly, in retrospect, pursued that Apple market and invested a lot of energy in building their networks for the Apple II. But in our prospecting, we directed our sales force, if the customer has Apple IIs, they're not a good prospect. So to qualify, you ask them if they have IBM PCs or compacts or do they have Apple IIs. If they have Apple IIs, do not waste time with them. So that was part of our qualification process.
In the early stages, is it ever necessary to lower your qualifications?
To what?
To lower your qualifications? Say, okay, we're not exactly there, but we need like an early customer, so we'll take you. Or
yeah, it's a matter of degree. At some you get desperate. Incidentally, if an unqualified prospect wants to buy your product, you probably should sell it to them. It's just that your qualification procedure somehow didn't apply to them. Not always, but as a general model, if someone who's unqualified comes with an order, you should take it. Just generally speaking. Other questions? So now, listening. Let's see, is that next? Yeah. So now you're talking with your prospects, and now I'm going to teach about listening. And I'm going to begin with another of my favorite stories. My wife, Robin, noticed that she was repeating herself a lot. And I would keep asking, what did you say? So she recommended, especially since I'm 67 years old, that I go see a doctor about my hearing. So I went to the doctor, and the doctor gave me all the hearing tests, and then she said, your hearing is perfectly fine. Have you tried listening? And I think I'm a pretty good listener, but apparently I was tuning Robin out occasionally, and it was pissing her off. So have you tried listening? And that is the most important lesson to learn in sales, is to learn how to listen. So ask for advice and then stop talking. When my partner Bill Krause became chief executive of my company, he came from Hewlett Packard, where he was a big shot, and I wanted to learn everything Bill knew about management because he was so good at it. And he was at one of our staff meetings, and I noticed him furiously taking notes. So I snuck around behind him to see what he was writing. And on the yellow pad, all it said was DNT. Over and over again, DNT. So after the meeting, I asked Bill, what's DNT, Bill? And Bill said, Bob, like you, I talk too much. So this is a reminder, do not talk. Do not talk, do not talk. So ask for advice and then stop talking. And some people have a hard time like me, stopping talking, and it's a sign of insecurity. You don't want to stop talking because you're afraid if you stop talking, the other person might say something you don't want to hear, so you keep talking. And you have to learn to take the risk of not talking and paying attention. Any questions? You notice I stopped talking? Oh, I started again. There's this saying in sales that when you stop talking, he who talks next loses. So then when you stop talking, you have to pay attention. What's a good sign that you're paying attention? Yes?
Taking notes.
You're reading my
I know that's all I really think
Before
that's
that
a good
one. Another good sign, for example, is to look at the person to whom you're paying attention and watch their lips move. It helps with comprehension. So looking right in the eyes of a person that you're listening to is a really good sign to them that you might be listening. And so many people just won't look people in the eye. But taking notes is another one. And it's so cool to take notes. One, it helps you remember what they said. The other thing is it acknowledges to them that you're listening. And that what they're saying is important to you because you're writing it down. So yes, take notes. And then there's summarization. And summarization goes both ways. When you're listening, occasionally you want to say, to acknowledge that you're listening and to check that you're understanding, you say, well, what I hear you saying is, and summarize. It's very powerful medicine when you summarize somebody you're paying attention to. Very powerful medicine. Occasionally you will meet a person who refuses to be summarized. So they'll say, A is B. And then you'll say, what I'm hearing you say is A is B. And they'll say, no. A is mostly B. Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that A is mostly B. No. A is mostly B except when it's not C. And so on. So those people are a problem, but not everybody's that way. So you should summarize. And a key in summarization is a way of acknowledging that you're paying attention. And testing your understanding is to use their words. So if they refer to the object as a razzafraz, you should say razzafraz, even though you ordinarily call it a dingbat. So the person says, I have this brown razzafraz, and you say, oh, you have a brown dingbat. No. See, they want you to use their words, and you need to recognize synonyms and allow synonyms, else you become one of those people who's impossible to summarize. So you want to use the words of the people you're listening to as a sign. Another trick is, not trick. Yeah, trick. You think your products are great. I think my products are great. By the way, if you don't think your products are great, you should not be selling them. Have I mentioned that? You need to believe in your products. If you don't believe in your products, you should resign and go to a different company. The trick is to get your positive words about your product coming out of your customer's mouth. You saying your products are fabulous is great, but they saying they're fabulous is much better, and it sort of signifies that you're getting through. So you want to hear your words coming out of your customer's mouth. And finally, a key listening feature is waiting and listening for the right moment to ask for the order. The number one problem in selling is people forget to ask for the order. Have I told you my story about Lynn Seff? Okay, I'm about to put a bunch of ones on that matrix there. So I was the president of my junior high school, and Lynn Seff was the secretary of the junior high school. And the prom was coming up. And I really liked Lynn Seff, but I didn't invite her to the prom. For the normal reason, I was afraid she'd say no. I then went to my high school reunion 20 years later, and there was Lynn, who had since married Joe Malchusky, the captain of the football team. And I'm talking to Lynn, and she says, you know, Bob, I've always wondered why you didn't invite me to the prom in 1959. I've always wondered. So you got to remember to ask for the order. But before you ask for the order, you need to be listening. You need to listen for when to ask for the order, because there are times. You're making your pitch, you're developing your relationship, and you listen for buying signs. Like if the customer says, is it available in yellow or only blue? That's a buying sign. How much does it cost? If I ordered it today, when could I have it? Those are all buying signs. So that's another purpose of listening, is to listen for those. Because if you hear enough of them, it becomes time to ask for the order. Now in selling, here's an important distinction, and engineers have a hard time with this. Features versus benefits. My workstation has a 386 that runs at 1 megahertz. That is a feature. Those are features. My network carries packets at 10 megabits per second up to a kilometer. Those are features. With my network, you can share your printer and save a bunch of money. That's a benefit. And customers want to hear what the benefits are. They rarely are, well, they're interested in the features, but they want to get to the benefits. So in order to sell effectively, you need to understand the distinction between features and benefits, particularly with respect to your customer. What do they consider the benefits to be? And sell with benefits rather than features. And I'll skip all the rest of these, my very favorite version of this is a famous quote attributed to Peter Revson, the founder of Revlon Cosmetics, who says, roughly speaking, we don't sell perfume, this is a paraphrase, we don't sell perfume, we sell hope. So the cosmetics are the features. But this man, who was very successful in the cosmetics industry, realized that he wasn't selling cosmetics. His customers wanted the perfume because they hoped it would improve their lives. He was selling hope. That's an excellent example of a distinction between a feature and a benefit. Any questions about features versus benefits? Any question about anything?
Mr. Chance.
I'm going to wait. Yes.
How do you, or I guess, what was your experience like selling to your first customer?
You mean at 3Com?
Yeah.
Well, we began by selling consulting services because we knew we had a consulting company. And this gives me an opportunity to tell my story about Bernie Feshbach, who says, what is Bernie famous for saying? I can't wait to tell Bernie that you remember. So Bernie hears that I'm working for Digital Equipment Corporation for $400 a day, but I'm about to negotiate with Texas Instruments. So these are my first two customers, going back to the question. And Bernie says, $400 a day, you got a PhD? He's from Bronx, I'm from Brooklyn. Bernie was from the Bronx. You have a PhD? You invented Ethernet and you're consulting for $400 a day? Oh, yeah. But he says, okay, let me tell you what you're going to do, and when you get down there to, where's TI? Dallas. Now, when you get to Dallas, here's what you're going to do. They're going to ask you how much you want to get paid. You tell them, you usually get $800. But because this engagement is so long, you're willing to do it for $600. And when they complain, your first move is up. So I go to Texas, I'm at $400 a day, and I got Bernie sitting on my shoulder, and the guy says, how much do you charge? I said, well, I ordinarily think it's $800 a day, but this is a really great engagement, so how about $600? And he said, okay. So I immediately boosted my rate from $400 to $600. I tried it again the next week with the General Electric Company. I got $1,200 a day from General Electric Company, just because I went up. Anyway, those are my first customers. That was consulting services, so that's a little different. One of our consultants, Bill Gates and I, had Sears Roebuck was our client, and they were considering getting into the personal computer business. So we were consultants again. And Bill, I went there with stories of how cool the personal computer was at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center and the future of the PC as determined by what we had experienced there. Bill Gates went to Sears Roebuck with instructions as to what exactly PC they should sell. So two completely different stories. And I remember when Bill brought Kei Nishi, who was his head of Japan, with us to this engagement. And Kei Nishi spoke for a while. And so imagine we're in the Sears Tower, and there's 10 pinstripe suits, all with cross pens. If you remember what a cross pen is, it was the cool pen. And they're all sitting around the table, the senior management of Sears Roebuck, and Kei Nishi says, "It is very important to act quickly and make no mistakes." And every one of those guys took out their pen and wrote that down. So, I'm sorry I didn't fully answer your question. But there is a word that is the number one deterrent to selling. It's the reason why I didn't invite Lynn Seff to the prom in 1999. And it's the reason why most salespeople don't ask for the order, and therefore don't get the order. It's very hard to get the order. Rarely do customers force the order on you without you asking. And what is that word that keeps people from asking for the order? What is that word?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is on the screen. No. So will you, Lynn, will you go to the prom with me? No, I'm going with Joe Malchusky. I don't want to chance that. The TI guy, 600. No, I think 300 would be plenty. Wrong answer. Don't want to ask that. So no, that's the word. No. Let me say it one more time. No. Okay, did any of you burst into flame and die? No. Did anything bad happen? I'm going to do it again. No. You're all still there. See, it's not so bad. No. No. My father-in-law, who's a professional salesman, he views no as the beginning of a sales opportunity. He tries to get a no and then begins working on no. And, so no means you're making progress. And what is the word? What is the? Now I'm not going to show you. What's the word that you answer no with? What?
Yes.
I can see yes, but my answer today is why. So you should, when you ask for the order, there are two there are many possibilities, but two main ones. One of them is yes, and the other one is no. And you need to be steeled and prepared to receive either of those answers. You get a yes, well then you have one set of actions, but you get a no, you have a set of others. And asking why is the immediate antidote to no. No. Why? Well, Joe Malchusky is a better basketball player than you are. He's the quarterback of the football team. Why would I want to go to the prom with you? Well, wait a minute, and then you can deal with her objections. One of the ways in dealing with objections is to have credibility. I think that point was made earlier, trust or credibility. Selling is mostly about escalation of credibility. Ultimately, the customer has to believe that they'll be better off by buying your product. They have to believe it. So this is a very important technique for selling. It's completely sincere. There's nothing subversive about it. And it works. And the method is very simple. You must get in the habit of making and keeping promises. Little ones at first. Here's one. I'll be there at 8. be in your office in Dallas at 8 o'clock on the 19th. Okay. So after you, that's a promise. So what's important that you do? Show up, and not 8:06. Early is okay, late is not okay. Because if you come late, you've broken a promise, and you've taught the customer just a little bit that you don't keep your promises. So you got to begin small and start keeping them, and then the next step is to escalate your promises and make them bigger. By Thursday, I'll have the proposal in. I'll be back to you with the product literature tonight. I will call your VP of acquisitions on Thursday, blah, blah, blah. You make bigger and bigger promises, ever building your credibility. And your credibility begins with building your own personal credibility, then the credibility of your company, and then the credibility, ultimately, of your products, which leads to that word that you blurted out. What's that word? Yes. Getting to yes. And it's done, I'm telling you, with this spiral of credibility that you create by being in the habit of making. See, a lot of people don't make promises. And by the way, when you make promises, you need to consider that you're able to keep them. So setting expectations is important. You can't make promises you're not going to keep. You have to think about the promise before you make it, and then you have to keep it. And if you keep bigger and bigger promises, you will get ultimately a yes. All right, so asking for the order, as I mentioned, a very overlooked thing in selling. So you need to, if you're very sophisticated, you can just blurt out the ask if you want, but maybe it's better to listen for a while and wait for the buying signs. And then, since you're selling over and over again, that is, sales is not a one-time thing, you're selling over and over and over and over again, that means when you hear you ask why the first time, you hear 3 objections. You make a note of those objections. The next time you ask for the order, anticipate those objections. And it's always better for you to say the objection than for your customer to say it. So, I know that you would prefer that our product be blue. But it's only green, but that's not a big difference. Green has been shown to be much more effective than blue in most circumstances. So would you like to buy it anyway? So there I am anticipating an objection that I've heard 7 times before from other customers, and the goal is to get it out there so that it comes out of your mouth and not your customer's mouth. Because if your customer makes an objection, they've caught you at something. Whereas if you blurt it out, you're not hiding it. You're just putting it out there. So you want to anticipate the objections and try to get them out there. And then you need to ask, or you need to remember to ask for the order. Do not forget to ask for the order. One of the techniques is called I forget what it's called. I was going to say the presumptive close. A presumptive close is a close in which you presume the customer is about to say yes. This variation is you don't say, do you want to buy my product or not? That is not the correct way to ask for the order. Much better way is to say, would you like it on Wednesday or would you like it on Friday? Would you like a blue one or would you like a red one? Do you want 10 or do you want 100? Both answers are yes. So try not to make it a yes-no ask. Try to make it an either-or. And then you need to be prepared for yes or no. And you might still get a no, in which case, what do you say? A lot. And then you get objections, and it's important to list the objections. When the customer says no, and you say why, and they start explaining why no, you've got to listen and write it down. And then you can summarize. And this leads to another effective selling technique, which is, so you have a problem with the fact I can't get it to you before Thursday. You have a problem that it's only available in red instead of blue, and you wish it were 20% cheaper. So what you're saying is if I can deliver it by Thursday in blue, 20% off that you'll buy, if I meet those 3 objections, will you buy the product? And you want the customer to say, well, yeah, I would. And then what do? You hit it out of the park by meeting, if you can. You can't always, but meet those objections. And then the customer feels some sense of obligation to buy the product because you got them to say, if I do X and Y, will you buy? And then you do X and Y, and then they buy. It happens a lot. Great technique. And by the way, then you repeat. Okay, so now I'd like to go to a more sophisticated level of selling now. And so, for example, the difference between sales and marketing. So this is like sales 102. We just did sales 101. We're not doing sales 102. And it's important, you'll find, to understand the difference between sales and marketing. It's all written right there. Any questions?
Nope.
Come on. I'm not that good a writer. There must be some questions. Something not clear up there.
Why is sales so important, but you don't say marketing is so important? Like, why is your focus on sales and not including marketing?
Actually, of the two, I enjoy marketing much more than sales. Sales is very hard work. And so I eventually got promoted out of sales into marketing. And I came all the way from engineering. So marketing is sort of toward engineering from sales. Salespeople are meat eaters, and marketing people are vegans. What are engineers? No, vegetarians. Engineers are vegans. Way over here. So no, marketing is important too, and marketing is a lot of fun. I have both purchased and sold advertising, which I mentioned is a very special kind of selling, and I've done both. Did you all see my tweet about advertising? You don't follow me? So this week I ran into a guy named Mark Bunting, who was very famous in the 1980s. He used to be in United Airlines, on the screen. His show called Bunting's World was on every United flight selling computer products. Anyway, he's a professor here at UT, I discover, a lecturer, a visiting lecturer, and he teaches advertising. And he this week presented me with a photograph of the marketing team at 3Com, which in 1988 bought a 10-page unit in Wall Street Journal. This is bucks. So there's a picture of I wasn't in the picture, but the whole 3Com marketing team standing behind this 10-page unit in the Wall Street Journal that he sold to 3Com. I guess that's why he has such a nice house in Dallas, I guess. Why did I mention that? Oh, that's marketing. That's fun. Other questions about this lengthy slide, which breaks all of the rules of PowerPoint? Come on now. Collateral? Yes.
In general, when companies are organizing their sales and marketing, are they both, is like sales under marketing in like hierarchical, or they run parallel, or how does that generally get arranged?
It doesn't quite go that way. But there is an oscillation in the evolution of organizations between having a vice president of sales and marketing or having two vice presidents, one of sales and one of marketing. And that decision is just about where you want to have the argument. Do you want to have the argument in the weekly ops meeting with the CEO, or do you want them to hash it out at some other meeting at some other time of the week? But sales and marketing are adversarial. So marketing, for example, sets prices. Sales wants prices to be lower. See, it's easier to sell when the prices are lower. So sales constantly pushes price down. It's marketing's job to keep the prices where they should be. So that's adversarial. Marketing will set the quotas. The way salespeople are generally compensated is against quota. They're given a quota. If they break quota, they make more money. If they miss quota, they get fired. So quota is very important. Marketing generally sets the quotas, and then sales whines and complains about it. So it's an adversarial thing. The marketing department gets leads for sales, and then sales complains that the leads are not well qualified. They're not qualified leads. So there's this constant struggle between sales and marketing in my experience. Yes.
Is there any commission structure for the marketing for creating the demand, or is it simply the sales are executing?
Marketing generally is not on commission, only sales. Generally, there are variations. Now, marketing is generally salaried and bonused, whereas sales is salaried and commissioned. So when you're in a rapidly growing company, salespeople are highly compensated because they constantly blow quota away. And when you're above quota, your compensation generally escalates dramatically, which annoys the engineers. The engineers then come into my office and say, I know Java, and that guy doesn't. How come he's getting paid 3 times more than me? And to which my answer is generally, well, come with me, let's go sell. Exactly. Typically lasts a couple of weeks. Yes.
Oh, this might be slightly off topic, but I guess could you maybe go into where like the sales engineer takes place? I've never had like a complete understanding of exactly what a sales engineer is, or if he even has a role in like something like this.
Oh yes, there's 2 kinds of simplifying, but there's 2 kinds of sales engineers, pre and post. So the pre-sales engineer goes with the salespeople, sets up demos, studies the customer situation, makes proposals based on the engineering considerations for configuration, management, stuff like that. Post-sales is after you've sold the product and it's installed. If there are problems, they're referred to post-sales engineering or engineering support. But in small companies, often you can't afford that. So well, first of all, you can't afford having any sales engineers, or you can only afford salesmen who can be their own sales engineers, which is a very particular kind of salesperson. Then eventually you'll get field sales engineering, and then as you get a little bigger, then someone has the idea of splitting it into pre and post. And you have to be pretty big to have a split pre and post sales team. Very important engineers. Yes.
So if the salespeople are the ones talking to the customers most of the time, I could see how there might be some conflicts with marketing if they're the ones telling the development team what features or making the PR, and sales could come back and say, well, our customers don't want that feature, aren't responding to your PR, and like it could just be conflicts, but it could be valid. So are there a lot of synergies with that? Like, are there people that work both ways?
You pegged it exactly. It goes just like that. If a salesman misses her quota,
right,
whose fault is it?
Right.
It's marketing's fault, obviously. They didn't give her the right tools. Product is overpriced. My quota was too high. And so that's when there's these meetings, and they result in answers. Some people get fired, some don't. Some get promoted, some don't, and policies get changed. So salespeople are in touch with the customer a lot. So the marketing people are generally responsible for writing the requirements documents for engineering.
Right.
But they'd be stupid if they didn't learn from the salespeople what's going on with customers. So a good marketing department spends a lot of time with salespeople gleaning what they have learned.
Do the marketing people ever interact with the customers?
Oh yes. They often go on sales calls for exactly this purpose, which is to listen and hear what the customers are saying. And generally marketing helps qualify, target. So it was marketing that said, salespeople, don't waste your time calling on people with Apple IIs. Marketing said that to the salespeople. Guess what? This happened 50 times. Salesman comes in and says, I got this great big customer in Ohio. It's the Ohio Bank, and they've got 8,000 Apple IIs, and they're dying for our product. So I think the customer's always right. So we should immediately take both engineers that we have in our company and pull them off the IBM PC product and put them on the Apple II product. And then you have to decide, is the customer right? And have I mentioned 2 engineers? Because one of the swing factors in such a decision is the resources available. And in a company like I was describing there, in the early days, we had 2 engineers, and then 4, and then 6, and we couldn't do the Apple II. We did eventually get around to the Apple II, but that was after Apple gave us a purchase order for $3 million. And then we did it, and it was a terrible mistake. We made 300 of them. They were pizza boxes that you could hook your Apple II to put it on the Ethernet. And they were bigger than the Apple II. So I believe those units are mostly in San Francisco Bay being used as boat anchors to put boats down. But no, so the conflict between sales and marketing goes pretty much as you described it. So we would, marketing, when I was for a time, toward my end at 3Com, was VP of marketing, corporate marketing. I would produce leads and hand them over to sales. Then I would come back a week later and the leads were still sitting there in the same boxes, unopened. I'd say, what's the problem here? And they'd say, those aren't good leads. Yes?
So if you're just starting out, I mean, would you recommend starting with just sales and getting your first couple of customers, or figuring out who you're going to market to? How do you balance those two, just starting out?
So there's sort of three kinds of people. There's sales, and there's marketing, and then there's business development. So in the very early days, this obviously varies by situation, but as a general matter, you start with a business development kind of person. So the distinction is business development people sell non-standard products, and they fight with the customers about what they really want. And out of that comes some notion of what standard product should be. And then once you have standard products, then you can send the sales force out to sell it. So the early learning is done in business development. So I guess in the order it would be business development, then sales, then marketing would be a logical order for me. So you see why, though. Business development is basically engaging customers to help define the standard products, which the sales force can sell, and then you layer on marketing to improve the effectiveness of the sales force. Well, very roughly speaking. And the other people in this room who have run companies probably have a completely different experience. Would anyone like to answer that question differently? Josh? Now, you see, he's reading his email.
I did just finish the assignment, actually, but right now.
Yes, sir.
I'll answer the question differently. Having run 3 companies, started 3 companies, and I think marketing should come first, which I think was the original question. Target market selection has been shown to be what the determinant factor of product success. And if you don't know if you're building it for, you shouldn't start building it. And you shouldn't even try to sell it, because how do you know who to call? So that's my answer.
Right. So the way both of us get to be right is that in the very early days of the company, there's only 2 people there. So the CEO, say, is 1/4 marketing, doing exactly that. So the marketing function is present in a fraction of the CEO at the beginning. And then later, you would then have a whole person doing marketing and then a department. That's how I think I would reconcile it. You're absolutely right. The product definition, market segmentation, all that marketing stuff, but that could be done by a fraction of the founding CEO, say, for example. So 3Com did, in its early days, I dreamed up what the products were going to be. And I argued that that was just a fractional marketing person, like this, probably like this. Any other questions about the distinction between sales and marketing?
What is marketing requirements for development?
Development are the engineers who develop the products. Marketing, there are many variations of this, but marketing writes a document called the marketing requirements document, which says this is the product that our customers want, that fits with the strategy of the company and our growth plan. They also do a product roadmap of all future products, what they're likely to look like. And then there's the requirements for the next product, which then go over to engineering, and then engineering builds that product. What I used to do, I would begin that process by writing the press release that I wanted to release in a year. And then I would give that press release to marketing. And marketing would then run that up the flagpole with customers and come to a requirements document, which would then go to engineering and would produce an engineering specification of the product. Sometimes engineering would find they couldn't build a product if you specified it. Not often, but sometimes. But I like beginning with the press release. I would dream up some great product and then write a press release as if we had it, and then hand that over to marketing, and they would write the requirements document for development or development engineering. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I never heard of marketing requirements as like a document. Or, I never heard of it like that for marketing accounts.
Yeah, it's usually marketing requirements, engineering response. And then,
Well, but this is a big company. None of these companies work that way.
well, I'm explaining how you get to be.
All of
None of
you
these
guys-
companies work that way. You're doomed.
Yeah, but for most of you guys, it's everyone's the same person, or it's two people. And I would say more commonly in a student startup, there's an engineer that ends up starting it and building it and going and driving, eventually figuring out how to build it.
So one of the ways in which you all students are lucky is that you have 3 instructors in this course who come from dramatically different experience bases. For example, the Atlanta Business Software, Peachtree Software experience. For example, what's the hell?
Some unknown little company.
What's its name? I keep forgetting.
Which one?
Other Inbox.
Other Inbox.
Yeah. And these are completely different companies, so it's good that you're hearing diverse points of view, so you can integrate them carefully. And I'm right, he's wrong. And what's that?
And I'm staying quiet.
And Josh may be right. My recollections, which I'm trying to share with you, may be poisoned by the fact that most of my experience at 3Com, it was a big company. It was a multi-billion-dollar company. So maybe my recollections of the early days have been poisoned by that later experience. I'll admit to that. Okay, so let me talk about shifting gears. Have I brought this up before? Have you ever driven a manual shift car? Probably not. Some of you have. Anyway, you shift gears. You have a clutch, you put in the clutch, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, like that. You roll backwards if you want. So the same is true of companies, particularly rapidly growing companies like yours will be. Occasionally you have to shift gears. And I'm going to illustrate how that occurred in my company in 2 ways in sales. And here goes. After my stint as CEO ended in June of '82, I became vice president of sales and marketing, and managed, since I knew a lot about Ethernet, I could sell it. And I managed to get us to $1 million per month in revenue. But then the selling became too complicated. I had 6 regional managers. I had to do their compensation plans. I had to manage their activity, channel conflict, contracts, distribution. Too much for this electrical engineer. So we got Mike H., who had been a very experienced salesman at Hewlett-Packard, and he took us, because he knew all that stuff, he took us from $1 million a month to $5 million a month. When guess what? He redlined. You know what redlining is when you're shifting? Engine over revs, you better shift. Mike redlined. So we replaced him with Chuck Kemper, actually. And Chuck took us from $5 million a month to $25 million a month. And what happened to Chuck? Redlined. Multi-divisional company, very broad product lines, channel conflict, international distribution, a lot of stuff that Chuck apparently just couldn't handle. So after succeeding in getting us from $5 million to $25 million, he redlined, and Bob Finocchio came in, and he took us all the way up to billions of dollars. This is gear shifting. All of these people succeeded, and then they redlined. In order for the company to continue growing, we had to shift gears, that is, replace them. Yes?
So why is redlining necessarily bad?
Have you ever redlined a?
I have. I understand why it's bad for a literal vehicle, but I don't get how the metaphor applies completely.
So the way in sales, the way you see it is your sales are going like this, and then they go like this. And they sit there and they go, what's happening? We used to be a hot company, and now our sales are flat. What's that? And then someone has to decide how to fix that. And I'm offering you a frequent explanation is that some of the people involved have redlined. Their operating range has been exceeded. Another good example of this is John Sculley, who was the CEO at Apple. He knew how to run a multi-billion-dollar, multi-divisional company, and he did so at Apple with great success for 10 years. I have no clue about how to run a company at that scale. But John cannot run a startup. He doesn't know how to run it. So he has a reverse problem, which is he redlines on the low end, and I redline on the high end. But in any case, redlining, if you run an engine too long in the red line, it burns up and explodes, which is what happens to companies if you don't shift. So Fred, your good friend, your college roommate is running sales. Sales are flat. Really like Fred. Choice: replace Fred, crash company. Replace Fred. And I've done that. I mean, I fired my, fire's the wrong word, let go. A college chum who was he was our marketing guy, and it turned out he was the wrong kind of marketing guy. He wasn't a high tech. He couldn't sell to engineers. He could only sell to and we needed to sell to engineers. It wasn't working, so I went in and I asked him to leave, my college chum. And halfway through the meeting, we both realized that was a really good decision. He would be happier, the company would be happier, and I'll be home. When Mike was replaced, he didn't leave the company. He became Mike H. He became Western Regional Manager. Chuck, on the other hand, disagreed with the judgment that he was the cause of the problems, and he stormed out. I didn't storm out. After I got fired, I continued as chairman of the board, which is a cush job. But now let me tell you another. Yes, sir.
So you've been obviously referencing how you went from being in it, like practicing as an engineer, into like sales and marketing. What did you do to, I guess, like just prepare for that transformation from such not polar opposites, but very different disciplines or different occupations?
First thing I did was take a course. The name of the course was Xerox Selling Skills. If you have a chance to take that course, you should. Now I had just left Xerox, so I was familiar with it. And it was a one-week course. I remember vividly that I took the course with 35 blonde women. Apparently, Xerox had a notion in those days that its sales force had to be all blonde women for some reason. But there I was, down in sales. He said, hey, sales is pretty good. So there was that, but then there was, I became head of sales and marketing in extremis. The company was burning through its cash, heading toward oblivion, when my board decided that Bill should run it and I should be head of sales and marketing. And we were heading toward, have I mentioned we were heading toward oblivion, so I had to learn really fast. So that leads into the second gear shifting story. Yes?
Well, if that's an extension, go ahead.
Okay.
Not a question.
Well, ask your question.
Okay. So my question is, how do you reconcile the fact that between redlining and just saturating your market share? So let's say you sold like 100 millions, that's your sales, like, and you redline. How do you know that you're not just completely done with, like, you sold to everybody you possibly can versus Bob F sucks and we need a new guy?
Well, that's an important decision, and it could go either way. And sometimes you decide that it isn't. Who sucks?
Bob.
That's the decision you have to make. What's the problem here? And I'm just saving you a lot of time. I say, you got to make a change. You can't just sit there. What did Einstein say? You keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And very often it's the person's operating range has been exceeded, and you need to change. Because that's a difference between a startup and one of these big companies. In big companies, the people grow faster than the company. They get promoted. In little companies, rapidly growing ones, the company is changing faster than the people. And very often people get outrun. So you try to recruit people ahead of where you are and hope that they can stick with it. But often, the company just blows past them and you can't. So let me tell you the story of Dave Depew. So on a particular June day, I became Vice President of Sales and Marketing at 3Com Corporation with zero revenue, cash going to zero, and no sales force. And the first thing I did was recruit 3 regional managers from inside the company. Mike became head of the Western region. He's the pro who later became Vice President of Sales Marketing, then went back to the Western region. Dave Depew was a production engineer. What didn't we need at that point? A production engineer, because we had no production. And I learned Dave was single, and his father had been a salesman. Duh. He became our Eastern regional manager. The whole Eastern United States. Dave, get on a plane, move. And then for the Central United States, Dave Colson, an English bloke, had a very sweet English accent. I gave him the Central region, which would include Austin, up the middle of the United States, and because he had an English accent, I gave him the rest of the world. The rest of the world. So there's the 4 of us. So we went from having 0 salespeople to having 4 salespeople. What do you think happened? We started getting orders, because when you have salespeople, they can ask for orders. And when you don't have salespeople, they don't ask for orders. So we immediately got orders. So it worked. So Dave Depew was very successful in the Eastern region. So much successful. What do you think his next assignment was? To be head of the Northeast region. And he really knocked it out of the park there. And this company is tripling every year now. And then he became head of the Washington, D.C. region, where he was stellarly successful and subsequently got the job, the plum job of being head of OEM sales in the D.C. region. So what do you notice about that? Dave's territory kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller, so in a way he was getting demoted. But I'm telling you, his compensation was going like this, and his responsibilities were going like this, because those territories were growing wildly. So he was being, if you look from the bottom up, he was being promoted. If you look from the top down, he was being demoted. And what we were doing was shifting gears there. So you have to believe me, he was very successful and happy running the OEM sales in the DC region. Questions? Yes.
Pitchers don't like coming out of a game. So do you think it's the responsibility of, say, the salesperson or anybody in a role to sort of raise their hand when they think they've hit a point where they're out of their element? Or do you think it's the people around them who need to yank them and they should just keep fighting as long as they can go?
Dan, you've already answered that question with your opening comment. Pitchers do not like being taken out of the game. So no one ever raises, rarely does someone raise their hand and say, you know, I've redlined, it's time to replace me.
Would you be concerned if somebody did?
I'd be impressed. It's happened. It's happened.
CEOs are more likely to do that.
The trouble is, not in my experience, but anyway, the trouble is that self-awareness is hard to come by. And proof of this is every day walking across campus. I see these people and I go, they don't own a mirror. If they had a mirror, they wouldn't look that way. The chances are they actually do have a mirror, and they look in the mirror and they don't see what I see. They see something else. And the same is true of the pitcher. He thinks his arm is about to start throwing strikes, even though he's walked the previous 4 batters. And it's gonna come back. So you have to structure the governance of your company so as not to rely on people volunteering that they've redlined. You need to notice when they've redlined, and I would say that includes a CEO. So in my case, I recruited a very strong board whose purpose was to be sure we always had the right CEO, and twice that damn board didn't choose me. But how was I going to argue with them? I had recruited them to do that, and they did it twice, 1982, 1990. And I did that design because I knew that I wasn't going to raise my hand. Say, I've run out of ideas, red line, and no one ever does that. Rarely does someone do that. So it can be unpleasant, by the way, but it's necessary. So now I'm going to go to selling 103. Yes.
I'm curious what kind of systems in place you had to teach negotiation and sales in the operation, or was that all learned just out in the field, and was there constant kind of refining of the selling process?
This goes back to Josh's earlier point. The answer to that question depends on what year.
Okay.
So for the first 10 years, there was no sales training, but negotiation, all that stuff. We expected our salespeople to know that from their previous jobs. But later, as the company got to 12,000 employees, then we had some training. And we also would compensate our employees for taking courses in related topics, not at the company, but at local universities and stuff. But in the early days, we didn't have time for that.
Yeah, I mean, it helps with startup, after they have time.
So the 6 regional managers, after the first 3, that was rifles to the band. You heard that expression, rifles to the band? When an army is losing and most of its soldiers have been killed already, during this Revolutionary War, they always had a band. But eventually you get so desperate you give rifles to the band. So my 3 regional managers were rifles to the band. There was no reason, well, Mike H. probably, but the other 2 were not supposed to succeed at those jobs. Those are bad decisions with good outcomes. But then when I got to 6 regional managers, Northwest, Southwest, North Central, South Central, Northeast, Southeast, those were experienced people recruited with a search firm that knew how to recruit regional managers, and these people had 10 years experience, and they knew how to negotiate, knew all the technicalities of selling. I'm about to tell a story about them too in just a second. So we got 26 minutes. Let's see, how does it go? Yeah, it's going to go really well. If I could just get this started again. That's a summary of what. Okay. There's a kind of selling. Remember I mentioned marketing can be really fun and sophisticated and cool, and frankly I prefer it to sales, because sales is really serious hard work. And by the way, marketing people make less money than salespeople. Because the salespeople, people who sell generally make more money than people who buy. Marketing people buy advertising. They buy quality material. They buy. Salespeople, what do? Sell. They get paid more money. But marketing is fun. And one of the things that you deal with is what I call high concept selling. And I'm about to tell you a very successful example of high concept selling. It's amazing how well this worked. So we were selling printed circuit cards about this big that sold for $1,000 that you would plug into your PC that would put your PC on the Ethernet. And the reason you don't understand what I just said is because today Ethernet is built in already to all PCs. But in those days, it wasn't. So we got to sell millions of cards to put PCs on Ethernet. And we sold them for $1,000 each, which is a lot of money for a card. And so our sales force, those 6 regional managers who I just mentioned, I recruited them from the previous generation of companies that sold mini computers. And in those days, a mini computer sold for $30,000, and our salespeople were used to getting the commission on $30,000. They'd make the $30,000 sale, they'd get their commission, and it was noticeable. They would take it home and they would spend it on food and college tuitions and stuff. So naturally, when we came out with a product for connecting PCs that cost $1,000, how many of them did they want to sell at a time? 30. So they went out to this market that didn't have any PCs or only acquired them recently and said, buy $30,000 of this thing that you've never seen before. And what happened? The sales cycle went to infinity. That's sales terminology. Sales cycle is how long it takes you to sell something to a prospect. Going to infinity means what?
No sales.
No sales. No one wanted to take a $30,000 risk on an Ethernet thing to connect. What's a PC anyway? And what do they do? I don't think so. Not only that, my boss would never approve it. So we devised a fairly standard thing called the 3-node PC starter kit. We took 3 of our cards and a diskette full of software, and we sold it for $3,000. And on the diskette was software that did, what it did was PFMTS. Print, file, mail, terminal, stubs. Those are the functions, which I can explain if you're interested, that this diskette software did. And we sold these kits. And guess, when we began offering these kits, what do you think happened?
We made sales.
We made sales. The sales cycle collapsed from infinity to a week. We started selling them. Now, of course, the commission on a $3,000 sale is troublous. It's low. So the sales force wasn't happy, but they were selling stuff now, so that was a step in the right direction. So we lowered the cost of trial. We got some orders, and our products worked. We promised that they would work. We promised that with these Ethernet cards, you would be able to share that expensive printer you had. In those days, printers cost like $5,000, $7,000. You could share that huge hard disk that IBM sold you, the 10 megabyte disk that you didn't know what to do with because it was so huge. You could share the 10 megabyte disk with an entire work group of PCs over the Ethernet. You could send email among your 3 PCs. You could hook these PCs up to a mini computer through terminal emulation, Telnet. You all know what Telnet is?
Yeah. Yes.
It's one of the early internet protocols for logging into somebody else's computer, and it's on your PCs today. So we had Telnet for terminal emulation, and then Stubs. Stubs is what an API is today. You know what an API is? Application Programming Interface. Stubs was access to the underlying plumbing to software that developers might write. So we sold these kits. People bought the kits, and then our salespeople, after a year or so, went back and said, "Hey, how'd the kit work? Just like I said, huh? Now you want to buy some more?" And what did the customer say? That horrible word. No. The reason is, even though this 3-node network kept all of your promises, it wasn't useful. So that led to high concept selling. An example of high concept selling. I'll give you a hint. Looks like that. Okay. We needed a way to explain to our customers why their 3-node network was not very useful. We knew, having lived at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center for 8 years, having PCs on every desk and Ethernets connecting them to an internet, to laser printers and to the real internet outside, we knew that it was useful. Why were our customers not finding the network useful? So we argued, using this systemic value critical mass argument, which looks like that their networks would become useful if they could just get them big enough to reach critical mass. That is, if they bought, say, 30 of our Ethernets, they would likely achieve critical mass and suddenly find their networks useful. This is the slide. This is the actual slide that was used. And I say slide, this was presented by salespeople as a 35 millimeter slide. We did not have PowerPoint in 1982. PowerPoint, have I bragged about PowerPoint before? Anyway, it was in the future. This is a 35 millimeter slide. And do you all understand it immediately? Are there any questions about that?
It's not entirely.
What's that?
Is there any data behind the chart, or just kind of cook it?
I refer to this as high concept selling. To this day, there's no data behind that chart. But the concept was that sending email among 3 people is obviously not going to be useful. You need to send email to everybody in the world. So there is a point at which you reach critical mass. That's all this says. And that a 3-node network was substantially below it, and there was a good chance that if you bought, say, 30, that you would be above critical mass. So armed with this and several other slides, our sales force, which was probably 12 people by then, went out and said, well, I just told you. Thank you. Your trial networks now work, and now you want to get real use, you've got to scale up. And our customers did. They believed this story. And we weren't lying, because we knew this story was true from having lived it at Xerox Research. We knew that this was true, conceptually. We just needed to tell this story, and we did, and the customers bought it, and thank God, or whomever, the networks proved useful. And then in 1995, quite a bit later, this became known as Metcalfe's Law. That is, the value of a network grows as the square of the number of its users. And I've been, and it's nice having a law with your name on it. But I've been defending it for 25 years, and I'm writing a new paper now on reconsideration of Metcalfe's Law, which I assure you does not disagree with this. But it puts it in a broader context and shows how Facebook is a manifestation of Metcalfe's Law. I can't wait to publish that paper in IEEE Computer in December. Now, questions about this law? Anyone? You see why I call it the high concept sell? It doesn't relate to the particulars of the user situation. It doesn't mention our product. It's a concept that our customers use to find a way to buy our products. Yes?
Didn't the same gentleman also make a prediction about the size of the market given that?
I know you're mocking me somehow.
No,
but I don't.
Is it like, they kind of go hand in hand, like, or was it the known total number of supercomputers? I know I've heard around that one too.
So the total market for the personal computers is like 7 or something, like
Total market for Ethernet cards.
I don't think I ever made such a ridiculous statement. Well, what was the total market for Ethernet cards?
The story I heard was 100,000.
That wasn't me. I've said many stupid things, but not that stupid. For example, I predicted that the internet would collapse in 1996. So far, I've been wrong.
Are you willing to eat your words if you are wrong?
Not only willing, I have already eaten my words. And that's PR. That was one of my most successful publicity stunts ever, eating that column. The irony is I'm now more famous for eating my column than I am for inventing the internet. Yes.
Why n squared as opposed to e to the n for Metcalfe's law?
E to the n?
E to the n, yeah.
Because you have n nodes in the network, and I was claiming that the value of the network had to do with how many connections you could make. And the number of connections you could make among n things is n times n minus 1. That is, each of the n devices can connect to n minus 1 others, and n times n minus 1 is approximately n squared.
So is this how they value
like the user base of Facebook, we'll say like maybe one Facebook, average Facebook user clicks 20 cents worth of ads. So then each user is worth 20 cents, and then they use that to value the network.
I've been to Facebook. I met with Charles. Zuck stood me up. Nobody at Facebook has ever heard of Metcalfe's Law, and success in no way depends on it. However, this paper, I got them to give me their data, 10 years of sales data, 10 years of connections data, 10 years of revenue, and I found a way to fit all those. I can't wait to read the paper. So, concept selling. You ever heard of Moore's Law?
Yeah.
That's concept selling. That's Intel. That's Gordon Moore at Intel. Developing a sense of destiny for the purchase of Intel products by projecting that there will be this ever exponential decline in the cost of semiconductors over time. Yes?
How do you provide, so I guess the Facebook example is probably a little bit easier, but how do you provide value to Facebook user number one? Or how do you sell to somebody when so much of the value is predicated on another?
Right, so a lot of business propositions only make sense if you're big. And unfortunately, most things start at zero. So the trick is, how do you get from zero to big? And it has something to do with virality, which means motivating the users to invite their friends to join. And not just because the product's great, but because it's in their interest for their friends to join. Like, if you want to share your photographs, you better have people to share them with. So you invite your mother to join so you can show her your baby photos. So getting viral is what gets you going from zero. It's Robin, my wife, calling from Maine. It's 36 degrees. Any other questions? So, I think that's what I'd like to encourage you now, now that you know everything. Selling 101, selling 102, and selling 103 is to go sell something. And selling isn't just an activity of companies. Selling is something that people do individually. Even engineers who are just sitting engineering, they sell. They sell their boss in getting funded to do their project. They sell their colleagues on the benefits of their solution. They sell all the time. Selling is a skill no matter what you do, even if you're not a professional salesperson. And the trick is to practice selling. So I recommend that you sell something today. The easy example, I think we're about to get a more sophisticated example here, but an easy one that you can do tomorrow is decide on a place that you'd like to have lunch with your friends and convince your friends to go with you to that place to have lunch. They might say, sure, in which case you've succeeded. But imagine if they say that word, that other word, no, then you get to practice. So, no, I don't want to go to, what's it, Mama
Food.
Mama who? Food. Food. Well, I don't want to go. Oh, wait a minute. No, Food's got this new dish. They just rolled out last week. We got to go try it. No, I don't like egg foo young. No, that's not it. They have they have a miso soup. It's fantastic. What's that? All the girls hang out there. That only works about half. But that's selling. That's selling, and it's a good way to get started selling. Is to practice. Now we've been. Josh had this great idea, which I like a lot, which is another thing, a real selling opportunity that you're all going to have. Have you designed it yet?
Yes.
You want to reveal it to us now?
Yes. I'm just trying to figure out how to use it. I'll try to put it on the screen. So I just posted, for those of you that have a computer open, I posted a link to the Facebook group. with a description of this, which I will read. Maybe. Maybe not. Okay, so the basic idea is, as Dr. Metcalfe said, as I thought of, is you're all gonna, the assignment, which was not in the syllabus, so this is an extra credit assignment, is to go sell a sponsorship for pizza. Right now, I've been buying pizza, and we'd like to have somebody else buy pizza. So the pizza costs about $550 a class, and to feed all of you. It's 27 pizzas. It could be other foods. Other foods are better. They're probably more expensive, although breakfast tacos were pretty cheap and were pretty good. But your goal is to sell a sponsorship to one of their upcoming classes. The next class is the most valuable one. And then they go down in value the rest of the semester. So whoever can do it faster gets more extra credit. And then the ultimate extra credit is to sell the $5,000 sponsorship to Demo Day. But you can't just sell it to anybody, because we're not just like, I was going to use a word I shouldn't use, but we're not just selling ourselves out.
We have
standards.
We want to have qualified prospects.
So the qualification for a company that's good enough to sponsor Demo Day that is not selling ourselves out is one that you would want to go work at. That's what we think is the good kind of company. So like Dropbox would be a really good company, or Google, or Facebook, or I don't know. You tell me where you want, because it's like, but it's somewhere you want to go.
Apple, Intel, IBM.
It doesn't have to be like the biggest company in the world with a huge name like that, but we want it to be a cool company that
Everywhere Energy.
Yeah.
Big ones like that.
So that's the basic assignment. It is in the, we wrote it up in a doc. It posted to the group. I asked Lori if she would grab the spots. So like basically it's first come, first serve. If you're the first one to write to Lori and say, I've got that week covered, you do that. There's a couple rules about it. So it's very complicated to take donations or money or sponsorships from other people to the university. So no money can change hands as part of this. The food has to just magically appear. Okay? The best way we normally do that with these sponsors, you just get them to order it. They just put it on their credit card and order it and have it delivered. And then that's pretty easy.
And what do they get for this job?
And in the document, it describes what we have to offer. The basic thing we have to offer is at the beginning of class, they can come up and they can say something for about 5 minutes and tell people what they do or about what they're doing or something they want you to know about. And then they also can hand out swag at the back. They can hand out t-shirts, cups, koozies, whatever they want to do. If you have other ideas of stuff that they should get, we're open-minded to it. We can't make any promises, but we're obviously only going to go so far for what we can do. But you can get creative, or you could do things for them, or other things, whatever you want to do. Yeah. Or you can just sell stuff, sell $550 worth of stuff, and then go buy pizza yourself. So any of those things count. And I think that's it. Anything else?
Any questions about that proposition?
The 7 o'clock class, not the 6 one?
No, the 6 o'clock class.
Also for the labs.
Yeah, all the food always shows up at 6, so that it's here for you guys, and then it's here for everybody else.
But don't you think it'd be better if they got to present right before the...
We'll let them say the 5 minutes at the beginning of the 7 o'clock class. Yeah, sorry, I thought you were asking when the food should come. Food should come at 6. We would let them speak at 7.
So, any creative ideas, definitely run it by Josh, Bob, and the rest of us before you guarantee anything. Just
good point.
So what does the $5,000 Demo Day sponsorship get? They get $5,000?
Basically the same thing at Demo Day. They get to get up in front of Demo Day, which is going to be hundreds of people, and very likely a very, very high-profile person that they'd be very excited to have their name associated with it. And I wrote in the document, once we confirm that person, it goes up to $10,000. Because then it won't be that hard to do it if we can confirm that person. I don't think. But you agree with that? All right, strategy. So right now it's to be determined. We're working on somebody big and it's $5 grand.
You see, now we have this Longhorn Startup brand that we care about a lot. And so we hope that the sponsors that you all would target would be brands that would contribute to our brand standing, not detract. So who would we rule out right away?
Nothing that can be is not legal to sponsor on TV or children's channels.
Enron is out.
Probably not alcohol companies. Probably
Definitely not alcohol. Some sort of brand approval sponsorship.
All right. And last thing, for residents, obviously getting up to leave. Next week, I was going to be doing my talk. I think I'm going to push mine to the following week because I have another great speaker coming in, who's Josh Dilworth, who's from Jones Dilworth, which is one of the best tech PR firms in town. He's brilliant about PR and marketing. He's a great talk. He recently just gave the Capital Factory, and so I think he'll be coming next week. If not, you'll have to settle for me. But that's it. It's 5 minutes early. Woo! Go Celtics!